There is something highly interesting in this account of his thoughts and feelings given by Hassan Salbert, particularly when we recollect that this was the man who afterwards organized the Society of the Assassins, so long the scourge of the East. We here find him, according to his own statement, dreading the idea of dying without having openly made profession of the truth, yet afterwards, if we are to credit the Oriental historians, he inculcated the doctrine of the indifference of all human actions. Unfortunately, this declension from virtue to vice has been too often exhibited to allow of our doubting that it may have happened in the case of Hassan Sabah. The further reflection which presents itself is this: can anything be more absurd than those points which have split the Moslems into sects? And yet how deeply has conscience been engaged in them, and with what sincerity have they not been embraced and maintained? Will not this apply in some measure to the dissensions among Christians, who divide into parties, not for the essential doctrines of their religion, but for some merely accessory parts? Hassan, on his arrival in Egypt, whither his fame had preceded him, was received with every demonstration of respect. His known talents, and the knowledge of the high favor and consideration which he had enjoyed at the court of Malek Shah, made the Caliph esteem him the most important acquisition to the cause of the Ismailites, and no means were omitted to soothe and flatter him. He was met on the frontiers by the Dialdote, the Sharif Tahir Kafranite, and several other persons of high consideration. The great officers of state and court waited on him as soon as he had entered Cairo, where the Caliph assigned him a suitable abode, and loaded him with honors and tokens of favor. But such was the state of seclusion which the Fatimite caliphs had adopted, that during the 18 months which Hassan is said to have passed at Cairo he never once beheld the face of Mostanzar, though that monarch always evinced the utmost solicitude about him, and never spoke of him but in terms of the highest praise. While Hassan abode in Egypt, the question of the succession to the throne, always a matter of dispute in Oriental monarchies, became a subject of dissension and angry debate at court. The Caliph had declared his eldest son, Nizar, to be his legitimate successor, but Badr al-Jamalid, the Emir al-Juyush, or commander-in-chief of the army, who enjoyed almost unlimited power under the Fatimites, asserted the superior right of Mustili, the Caliph's second son, which right his power afterwards made good. Hassan Salbert, not very wisely, as it would seem, took the side of Prince Nizar, and thereby drew on himself the hostility of Badr al-Jamalid, who resolved on his destruction. In vain the reluctant Caliph struggled against the might of the powerful Emir al-Juyush. He was obliged to surrender Hassan to his vengeance, and to issue an order for committing him to close custody in the castle of Damietta. While Hassan lay in confinement at Damietta, one of the towers of that city fell down without any apparent cause. This being looked upon in the light of a miracle by the partisans of Hassan and the Caliph, his enemies, to prevent his deriving any advantage from it, hurried him on board of a ship which was on the point of sailing for Africa. Scarcely had the vessel put to sea when a violent tempest came on. The sea rolled mountains high, the thunder roared, and the lightning flamed. Terror laid hold on all who were aboard, save Hassan Salbert, who looked calm and undisturbed on the commotion of the elements, while others gazed with agony on the prospect of instant death. On being asked the cause of his tranquility, he made answer, in imitation probably of St. Paul, "Our Lord Seedness has promised me that no evil shall befall me." Shortly afterwards the storm fell and the sea grew calm. The crew and passengers now regarded him as a man under the especial favor of heaven, and when the strong west wind sprung up, and drove them to the coast of Syria, they offered no opposition to his leaving the vessel and going on shore. Hassan proceeded to Aleppo, where he stayed some time, and thence directed his course to Baghdad. Leaving that city he entered Persia, traversed the province of Khuzestan, and, visiting the cities of paragraph continues Isfahan and Yazd, went on to the eastern province of Kerman, everywhere making proselytes to his opinions. He then returned to Isfahan, where he made a stay of 4 months. He next spent 3 months in Khuzestan. Having fixed his view on Amargan and the surrounding country in Iraq as a district well calculated to be the seat of the power which he meditated establishing, he devoted 3 entire years to the task of gaining disciples among its inhabitants. For this purpose he employed the most eloquent deists he could find, and directed them to win over by all means the inhabitants of the numerous hill forts which were in that region. While his deists were thus engaged, he himself traversed the more northerly districts of Horjan and Dalam, and when he deemed the time fit returned to the province of Iraq, where Hussein Kini, one of the most zealous of his missionaries, had been long since engaged in persuading the people of the strong hill fort of Alamut to swear obedience to the Caliph Mostanser. The arguments of the Diet had proved convincing to the great majority of the inhabitants, but the governor, Charlie Mehdi, an upright and worthy man, whose ancestors had built the fort, remained, with a few others, faithful to his duty, and would acknowledge no spiritual head but the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad, no temporal chief but the Seljukian Malik Shah. Mehdi, when he first perceived the progress of Ismailism among his people, expelled those who had embraced it, but afterwards permitted them to return. Sure of the aid of a strong party within the fort, Hassan is said to have employed against the governor the same artifice by which Dido is related to have deceived the Lydians*. He offered him 3,000 ducats for as much ground as he could compass with an ox hide. The guileless Mehdi consented, and Hassan instantly cutting the hide into thongs surrounded with it the fortress of Alamut. Mehdi, seeing himself thus tricked, refused to stand to the agreement. Hassan appealed to justice, and to the arms of his partisans within the fortress, and by their aid compelled the governor to depart from Alamut. As Mehdi was setting out for Jamargan, whither he proposed to retire, Hassan placed in his hand an order on the Rais Mozaffar, the governor of the castle of Kurdkul, couched in these terms: let the Rais Mozaffar pay to Mehdi, the descendant of Ali, 3,000 ducats, as the price of the fortress of Alamut. Peace be upon the Prophet and his family. God, the best of directors, sufficeth us. Mehdi could hardly believe that a man of the consequence of the Rais Mozaffar, who held an important government under the Seljukian sultans, would pay the slightest attention to the order of a mere adventurer like Hassan Salber. He, however, resolved, out of curiosity, or rather, as we are told, pressed by his want of the money, to try how he would act. He accordingly presented the order, and, to his infinite surprise, was forthwith paid the 3,000 ducats. The Rais had in fact been long in secret one of the most zealous disciples of Hassan Sabah. Historians are careful to inform us that it was on the night of Wednesday, the 6th of the month Rejab, in the 483rd year of the Hijra, that Hassan Sabah made himself master of Alamut, which was to become the chief seat of the power of the sect of the Ismailites. This year answers to the year 1090 of the Christian era, and thus the dominion of the Assassins was founded only 9 years before the Christians of the West established their empire in the Holy Land. Footnotes 43 : for Hassan ben Sabah, son of Sabah, so named from Sabah Homeri, one of his pretended Arabian ancestors. 44 : the Sunnah is the body of traditions, answering to the Mishnah of the Jews, held by the Orthodox Muslims. 48 : race, from the Arabic ras, the head, answers in some respects to captain, a word of similar origin. Thus the master of a ship is called the race. Sir John Malcolm says, it is equivalent to a squire, as it was originally understood. It implies in Persia the possession of landed estates and some magisterial power. The race is in general the hereditary head of a village. 50 : merchant. 53 : Sir J. Malcolm says that the person with whom he read this portion of history in Persia observed to him that the English were well acquainted with this stratagem, as it was by means of it that they got Calcutta from the poor Emperor of Delhi. Chapter 4. Description of Alamut. Fruitless attempts to recover it is extension of the Ismailite power. The Ismailites in Syria attempt on the life of Abu Hardis, a treaty made with Sultan Sanjar. Death of Hassan. His character. Alamut, the name so famous in the history of the East, signifies the vulture's nest, an appellation derived from its lofty site. It was built in the year 860, on the summit of a hill, which bears a fancied resemblance to a lion couching with his nose to the ground, situated, according to Hammer, in 50½ degrees east longitude, and 36 degrees north latitude. It was regarded as the strongest of 50 fortresses of the same kind, which were scattered over the district of Ragbar Riverland, a mountainous region which forms the border between Persian Iraq and the more northerly provinces of Dalam and Tabaristan, and is watered by the stream called the King's River Sharab. As soon as Hassan saw himself master of this important place, he directed his thoughts to the means of increasing its strength. He repaired the original walls, and added new ones. He sunk wells, and dug a fine well, which conveyed water from a considerable distance to the foot of the fortress. As the possession of Alamut made him master of the surrounding country, he learned to regard the inhabitants as his subjects, and he stimulated them to agriculture, and made large plantations of fruit trees around the eminence on which the fortress stood. But before Hassan had time to commence, much less complete, these plans of improvement, he saw himself in danger of losing all the fruits of his toil. It was not to be expected that the emir, on whom the sultan had bestowed the province of Rabbar, would calmly view its strongest fort in the possession of the foe of the house of Seljuk. Hassan, therefore, had not had time to collect stores and provisions when he found all access to the place cut off by the troops of the emir. The inhabitants were about to quit Alamut, but Hassan exerted the usual influence of a commanding spirit over their minds, and confidently assured them that that was the place in which fortune would favor them. They yielded faith to his words and stayed, and at length their perseverance wore out the patience of the emir, and Alamut thence obtained the title of the abode of fortune. The sultan, who had at first viewed the progress of his ex-minister with contempt, began soon to grow apprehensive of his ultimate designs, and in 1092 he issued orders to the emir Arslantash Lionstone to destroy Hassan and his adherents. Arslantash advanced against Alamut. Hassan, though he had but 70 men with him, and was scantily supplied with provisions, defended himself courageously till Abidu Arli, the governor of Kasvane, who was in secret one of his dais, sent 300 men to his aid. These fell suddenly, during the night, on the troops of the emir. The little garrison made at the same time a sortie, the sultan's troops took to flight, and Alamut remained in the possession of the Ismailites. Much about the same time Malek Shah sent troops against Hussein Kini, who was actively engaged in the cause of Hassan Salba in Kulistan. Hussein threw himself into Mu'minabad, a fortress nearly as strong as that of Alamut, and the troops of the Sultan assailed him in vain. It was now that Hassan began to display the system which we shall presently unveil. The aged vizier, the great and good Nizam al-Mulk, perished by the daggers of his emissaries, and the Sultan himself speedily followed his minister to the tomb, not without suspicion of poison. Circumstances were now particularly favorable to the plans of Hassan Sabah. On the death of Sultan Malek Shah a civil war broke out among his sons for the succession. All the military chiefs and persons of eminence were engaged on one side or the other, and none had leisure or inclination to attend to the progress of the Ismailites. These, therefore, went on gradually extending their power, and fortress after fortress fell into their hands. In the course of 10 years they saw themselves masters of the principal hill forts of Persian Iraq. They held that of Shandar * King's Pearl and 2 other fortresses, close to Isfahan, that of Kalankan, on the borders of Fars and Kulistan, Amargan, Kurdku, and Firuzku, in the district of Komis, and Lamzar and several others in Kulistan. It was in vain that the most distinguished